So what's the craziest thing you've ever attempted? You know, pushing past your natural fears and natural sense of threat or dread. Today we want to talk about how reframing your sense of threats can change how you deal with your sexual cravings and how it can set you up for a new way of success in terms of porn recovery. Welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, let me just say that some of you haven't yet been on the website I created, which is bandofbrothers.care. And let me ask you, what are you waiting for? Because on there, you will see a number of great tools that you can download to help you in your recovery. So that's bandofbrothers.care. Some of you, I would love to hear from you and to reach out to me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com, whether it's just to, ask questions or whether it's to find out about coaching we do, individual or group coaching. I would love to hear from you. So see you on the website. I'd love you to also leave maybe a review or a 5-star, preferably a 5-star review on this podcast. Just apparently it helps people find it a little more easily when they're searching for things. So anyways, that would be super helpful if you would do that. Hopefully it'd be helpful for you as well. And today I want to talk about threats. And recently I saw a YouTube video where the talk show host James Corden, he leaned into something that most of us would consider a fear-inducing or threatening challenge. Let me play how it starts.
I'm here in Paris, California. It's 110 degrees, and today I'm about to jump out of an airplane with Tom Cruise. And I can't quite believe I'm doing this.
You are here.
I'm here.
You're here. You made it.
I'm here, and I'm terrified. Are we genuinely doing this?
I'm just amazed you're here. This is great. We're going to do this. I'm just so impressed that James is going skydiving. I mean, between you and me, I was half expecting him to text me and tell me he was canceling.
I've actually been trying to get a hold of Tom for the last couple of days to cancel, but apparently I had his number saved wrong in my phone. So I'd also like to take this time to apologise to Tom Hiddleston for all the messages I sent him about my case of food poisoning.
15,000 feet.
Shut
we'll go at about
up.
15,000 feet, something like that.
15,000
16,000
feet?
Yeah, because we want a good free fall, a little time to think about things in the air, play.
I'll be honest, I'm terrified. This feels like a mistake.
Now, let me just say this. I'm not saying that most of us need to take up skydiving to overcome what seems to be, for me, a fairly perfectly logical fear of heights, at least in my mind. But I do want to use this video to talk about threats, this idea of a jumping off point where we deal with our fears, our anxiety, and the threats that we feel around our sexual recovery. Now, let me just say this. In my thinking, I am starting to make a bit of a transition and rethink and modify some of the approach I take with guys when I work with them individually and with groups. Now you say, well, what kind of changes are you making? Well, let me give you the traditional advice that I give most guys, and some of this still applies, but this is the traditional advice that I give to guys that are starting out in recovery. Number one, do what you can to create a low-risk environment around you. That includes, for example, having filters on your computer, removing all sorts of ready access points to things like porn and things that you impulsively reach out to. And so remove all of those things that kind of trigger those autopilot behaviors that take you down the porn rabbit hole. So that would be the first advice that I give. The second advice would be in this whole area of threats. Do your best to anticipate upcoming threats and ways that you can proactively arm yourself in advance for the things that will throw you off your game. And the third thing that I do with guys is each week we check in and we talk about upcoming threats and things that we need to prepare for. So those are three things that I commonly do with guys and we commonly do in our groups. And I think by and large, that's still mostly good advice. It's especially important in the earliest parts of our recovery when it's hard to string together maybe more than a day or a few days or a week or two where we're not returning to porn. But this is the area that I guess I am rethinking through a little bit, and it's this whole emphasis on threats and having people who are threat focused in their recovery. Again, I think there's some good advice with what I've traditionally given, but I've also started to see what I would say almost some negative side effects that I see playing out in some guys' life. Let me explain. Number one, if we become overly threat focused, sometimes it creates almost a compulsive effort to create this perfect risk-free sexual environment. And sometimes the unstated principle is if we could only control all of our external stimuli, then we could be successful. And this is well-meaning, but what it does is it really portrays the world by and large as not a safe place. It leaves us being hyper-vigilant, where we are trying to separate ourselves from any and all sources of temptation. Of course, if you know anything about the history of Christianity, for example, or probably most other religious traditions as well, there has always been this impulse. People who want to go off into the desert or a monastery to get away from all worldly influences, which of course includes women in this situation as well. A different example of this would be in the time of the New Testament. There was this group of Pharisees that these people would have been around in the Jewish context. They were known as the bleeding Pharisees. And this is because they would walk around looking only at the ground, lest they somehow notice or meet the eyes of some woman and then be tempted. And that, of course, left them prey to walking into things like low-hanging trees or doorways. And that's where the bleeding, on their forehead, whatever, because they simply weren't looking up at their surroundings. So you get the idea. Remove yourself from all threats and sources of temptation. One of the things I have noticed, and it's a little weird, and you might identify with this, when removing yourself from all temptation seems to be the focus, what it seems to do is create the idea or create the reality that now even the smallest trigger seems to almost have a larger than life impact on our cravings. And all of this whole process, as I've described, it feels self-defeating. Because at the end of the day, there's always some sort of trigger to throw me off my game. So that's the first thing I've noticed with guys. Here's the second thing I've noticed. When we become overly threat-focused in our recovery, it's like we somehow encourage, and I've seen it with guys, almost this latent anger that guys go around with. And often I see it directed at women because, women mess with our desired threat-free, craving-free environment. I've heard guys say it's almost like these women are doing deliberately to mess with me on purpose. Don't they know they're making my life hard the way they're dressing? It's almost like women almost become the enemy. Needless to say, we want to wall ourselves off and separate ourselves off from any of these relationships or contact with those sort of women who could stir up that temptation. And the last one that I want to say that I have seen is sometimes the more overly threat-focused we are in our recovery, the idea is, and it almost like, paradoxically, it's almost like it makes our cravings even more powerful. If we spend all our time thinking about how to avoid cravings, the thing that we're trying to avoid continually is pressing into our lives. It almost creates it more powerful. Don't think about it. Don't think about what? Don't think about the elephant in the room. Don't think about the elephant in the room. So I am noticing this as a bit of a side problem with this overly focused approach to recovery. Now, one of the things that I have been working with recently is learning about a whole stream of counseling called cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, I know it's only one tool, and and I'm the kind of guy that loves lots of tools. If my buddy who's has probably every Milwaukee tool ever made, and I ask him what these tools are for, and he goes, let me think. Oh yeah, that's what this tool's for. If it's a tool Milwaukee makes, he has to have it. I'm kind of like that. I want to learn as many tools as possible in my recovery. So one of the things I'm learning in cognitive behavioral therapy is this concept or principle called reframing. And I think it would actually have some things to say to address this hyper threat focus. Now, let me explain a little bit about how cognitive behavior approach works when we apply it to the cravings that we face. Apparently, this has also been proven in studies. It's effective at the brain science level. I'm too much of a dummy to get into understanding or explaining all of those things. All I'm going to say is there's science behind some of this stuff, this idea of reframing or cognitive restructuring. And here's the idea. It refers to an intentional choice to change how you are viewing a situation or trigger, shifting it from bad to good, from threat to opportunity. And to do that, it makes cravings or any emotion less likely to get triggered, and makes you more able to keep control over your behavior should a craving or any emotion get triggered. So that's the concept. So you say, well, why does that matter when it comes to, let's say, sexual cravings? Well, here's what the research shows. If you are dreading having a temptation in a certain situation, your dread ensures that 1, you will get triggered quickly while in that situation, and 2, you will experience more stronger cravings and tunnel vision than you would have otherwise. In other words, dreading something, it only charges or amplifies a situation in advance, and then leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So your anticipatory dread or your anticipatory threats makes cravings more likely and more powerful. Now that's a pretty heavy concept, isn't it? Apparently, by dreading situations that present challenging emotions, you make it more likely that tunnel vision will lead you into giving to that emotion's urging, and you will make the whole sequence more likely to occur. In other words, if you see the temptation as negative, you will respond emotionally, which is not good. But if you see the temptations in a positive way, you will respond through your appraisal part of your brain or cognitively. So if we see triggers, for example, through the lens of dread or threats, then it will heighten our emotional response and our automatic behaviors are more likely to happen. So that's what the science would say, and that's what cognitive behavioral therapy would say. You might have to go back and listen to that again. Now, in order to counteract that, the skill you therefore need to develop is the skill of reframing. To reframe something, you first need to notice that you are viewing it in a negative way and perhaps even dreading it. So when you see a trigger coming, you go, oh no, here it comes. So that would be dread. Or you could see it in a negative way, for example, like self-pity. Why do these triggers always happen to me? Or maybe you see the trigger in a negative way through complaints. Why don't people dress more appropriately? All of those are negative ways of seeing the trigger. Then what you need to do, so first of all, you need to notice that you're doing that, and then you need to make a conscious effort to reconsider the situation in a different light. So from seeing it as a negative threat, you now reframe it as seeing it as a positive challenge, a challenge which now offers you the opportunity to grow. Rather than saying, take it away, you are now saying, bring it on. Rather than saying, take it away, you are now saying, bring it on. Let's boil this down to a single sentence. Whenever we encounter a threat, we reframe the threat as a challenge and an opportunity to grow. I tried it with my group this morning. In a group I was leading, one of the guys shared a relapse he'd had, but then he found in the relapse that he was facing a new challenge in his life, and the challenge was around hiding his behaviors. So then we talked about how that relapse could actually lead him as an opportunity, lead him towards the opportunity to practice more rigorous honesty in his life. And then another guy shared, for example, how he was finishing an important project. And in these times, whenever he finished an important project or came to the end and he felt like he had hit it out of the park, then he would often go to porn to reward himself for good behaviors. So he described, instead of what would just be a threat, he says, you know what? Here's the challenge. I recognize in my challenge that I now have an opportunity to develop new ways to celebrate and reward myself when things go well. So it wasn't just threat focused. He was now seeing it through the eyes of a challenge and the resulting opportunity. Now, apparently, it's not just a matter of telling yourself it's an opportunity. You have to mentally discover the opportunity in the challenge. So my last two examples, a guy, he said, okay, I'm going to discover the opportunity in what I've just been through this week is an opportunity for me to practice more rigorous honesty. The second guy who talked about how he would often reward himself with porn, he says, you know what, I'm now recognizing the challenge is and the opportunity is to now find new ways to reward myself. That's where the opportunity is in my recovery. Now, some of you, if you are a Bible reader, you might be thinking, hey, this approach sounds like another set of instructions I've heard before. And you would be right. There is a biblical verse that starts with the phrase, count it all joy. And that's found in the first chapter of the book of James. And what it actually does is it talks about really the same reframing exercise, where what you do is you take all of those trials and tribulations you're facing, and then the verse instructs the listeners to see those trials and tribulations as an opportunity, seeing it, counting it as an opportunity for perseverance and growth. So it is interesting there. So let's take that CBT, cognitive behavior therapy approach, and let's talk about and apply it to this whole idea of dreading temptations against purity. If you instead practice the stance of bring it on, kind of like James Corden, who was actually willing to get on the plane, although he complained a lot doing it, in one sense, the opportunity for James Corden in that example is to experience the thrill of conquering a fear. Now, I know that craving is not a comfortable feeling. Of course it's not, especially unsatisfied craving. But perhaps you could reframe cravings, and especially unsatisfied cravings, as proof for what it really is, proof of progress. See, in the past, you never had unsatisfied cravings because you always just experienced the craving and then ran to act it out. Now, when you're experiencing unsatisfied cravings, it's proof of your progress. Now, I know that some of this is going to be a bit of a tough sell for some of you who are hearing this, and some of you may be led or possibly are misinterpreting some of the things that I'm saying. So let me give you a couple things that I am not saying. Number one, I'm not advocating you deliberately putting yourself in harm's way or doing things that deliberately stir up your cravings. So we can rule out going for lunch at Hooters or the local strip bar just to test our newfound strength of sobriety. Well, this will be a challenge and an opportunity for growth. No, I'm not saying that. And I'm going to quote from a great website. It's called purityispossible.com. And on that website, what they do is they go through cognitive behavioral therapy and they apply it to the whole area of purity. And this is what I think it's Kevin Magers, I think is the author of it. This is what he says. Occasions of craving should not be positively sought. That's what we were saying. I'm not saying. So occasions of craving should not be positively sought. But when cravings do get triggered, the discomfort of the craving has to be fully welcomed. And he makes this claim. He says, reframing is a powerful way of growing in the virtue of purity. And he says this, in my clinical practice, I have seen people who spent years struggling to grow in purity without success make sudden progress as soon as they begin to practice it. We're going to maybe take another podcast and talk about how to fully welcome some of this stuff. We'll do that maybe next time. But that's a pretty powerful statement that this enabled some people to make progress where they've not experienced progress before. So the first thing I'm not saying, hear me clearly, is I'm not saying go out and intentionally put yourself and embrace cravings in the sense of put yourself in situations where it's just craving is going to be stirred up. I'm not saying that. Second thing I'm not saying is that we no longer need common sense tools. It's important that we do and use common sense things to facilitate a low risk environment. I have a content filter on my computer. You know, when my wife goes off to work, all the remote controls go away as a form of pre-commitments for me to be able to work without obsessive thinking throughout the day. I would say to guys, if you have certain weak links in your surroundings and in those weak links, you have acted out on them before, then you've got to remove those weak links. All of those things are just common sense to me. But I am saying that, you know what? You can't remove all sources of temptation, and you're still going to need to practice what I'm talking about here, reframing, if you're not going to have a neurotic form of recovery, an overly threat form of recovery. So here's a couple examples that I would say are people that are growing in their recovery and applying this in a good way. So, for example, instead of avoiding women as threats, you see them as potential people. Well, there's a concept. Even perhaps friends. So that will counter the dehumanizing, objectifying results that take place when you set up these artificial boundaries between you and any woman that might trigger you. I love what Matt Dobshoot said in a recent episode of Porn Free Radio. He said one of the biggest benefits of recovery he's found is learning to develop friendships with women. Oh, it was great. That's a healthy form of recovery. So, the second thing I would say, here's another way you could practice it, is reframe some of those environments that you have avoided to the detriments of other values that you have. I think I've used this example before. Let's just say, you have children, maybe you're married, you have kids, your wife, and it's a hot day, and your wife says, "Hey, why don't we take the kids to the beach?" And you go, "No, I don't do beaches. There's skin at beaches. There's water at beaches, water and skin." And but you may go, "You know what? It's important that we spend a day at the beach. I'd like to not lose this opportunity with my kids. Yes, it could be a challenge for me, but get some help to help lean into the opportunity to be fully present with your kids, and grow in the opportunity and the ability to gain control over your eyes and gain some maybe confidence in being able to deal in these sorts of situations." See, those are some examples of applying reframing. Now, I don't think CBT, it sounds like a drug, CBT contains all the answers to recovery. Again, I just like tools. I think this was really helpful. They don't have a lot to say, for example, about relational connections, and I think that's a really big part of recovery. But this is not what CBT is meant to do. It's about your proper self-talk, the approach you're taking, what's going on in your mind. Sure, it's individualistic, but that's kind of goes with the territory. It also, CBT doesn't talk a lot about maybe your unmet emotional needs and things that you've inherited, or so that would be another area. Again, but it's not a tool that does that particular thing. I think it can be helpful. It's not something I've heard a lot about. I've listened to a lot of recovery podcasts, and I've not really heard it really talked about in this way. Let me just say I'm in the process of all the guys I work with. We are changing the way we do our check-ins. In the past, we always did fast check-ins. Every guy that shows up every week, we do a fast check-in. Feelings, actions, sobriety, and threats. FAST, fast. But, that doesn't quite work now in this new approach. We're now doing FASCO. FASCO, it's like Costco, but it's FASCO. It sounds like a gas company. FASCO. FASCO is this: your feelings, your actions, your sobriety, and then we put challenges and opportunities to end it off. In other words, how can we deal and grow by transforming the coming threats into an opportunity for growth? Now, I recognize for some of you, this podcast today might be challenging. Some of it might even be almost counterintuitive for you. Recently, I was teaching this last week at a high school. I teach a couple days a week, and I saw this poster on the wall, and this is what it said. It said, "It doesn't get easier, we get stronger." I was like, oh, I love that reframing. If we could learn to welcome even the urges that come our way as opportunities to grow stronger, then I think we could begin to practice a little bit of that bring it on thing when it comes to developing new habits. So bring it on. Whether or not you decide to jump out of a plane or not, I really hope that you perhaps begin to see your threats in a new way, not just something to bring about fear and dread in your life, but actually opportunity and challenges to grow. Till next time, see you later.